So now this is going to bring me into the whole reason why a lot of white people are saying that Africans sold other Africans into slavery. You have to understand, as I said, when the New World was being established, when America was being set up, there was a high demand for slaves. So the Europeans went into Africa. They went in under the disguise of religion. They went in there saying they wanted to spread the word. And to the chiefs and to the kings in those villages who allowed them in, they started to give them gifts. The ones who they can communicate with, they gave them gifts, they gave them presents to come in there and allow them to set up churches. Now, understand, a lot of tribes did not allow them in there. You know, tribes like the Ashanti, any white man that stepped foot on Ashanti territory, they was killed immediately. A lot of tribes did not allow them in. So for the tribes who did allow them in, when they could communicate with those kings and with those rulers of those villages, they would give them gifts and try to butter them up and then pay them to allow them to establish a church or some kind of, place where they can sleep to, teach the word. So now understand, when African tribes went to war with other tribes, they didn't always kill the tribe members. A lot of the tribe members who survived, they kept as prisoners of war, and they became servants to that tribe who they was fighting against. So now it's just like what was happening during ancient times. You go to war, you get conquered, then you become a slave. Now, if you get trapped, if you come to try to kill me in my house, you come to try to kill me, and I beat you and I defeat you, today we'll call the cops on you, you get locked up. Those tribes, they kept them in those villages, in those towns. They kept them and said that, hey, now since you tried to kill me, you killed this guy, you killed that guy, you killed that guy, you wounded this guy. Instead of me just killing you, guess what? You're going to serve these people. This is how you're going to pay back what you have done. You're going to serve these people. You're going to become a prisoner of war. So understand, this is something that has been going on long before the white man ever set foot into Africa. It's how it was done. The Africans had traditions. If you saved a person's life, then you owe them your life. You would basically become their servant until they release you from that debt, or until you save that person's life. It's just how it was done. The African tribes had customs. They had things they was accustomed to long before any white person stepped foot into Africa. There's something you need to understand, that tribes was doing this. They was enslaving other tribe members. They was not enslaving their brothers and sisters. They was not enslaving people that they knew. They was enslaving their enemies. Every single civilization on this planet has went to war with its own people, period. White people have went to war with white people. Asians have went to war with Asians. It's just how it goes. People go to war. People get pissed off about something. People don't agree on something and they go to war. The same thing happened with African tribes. So now understand, once the Africans got comfortable with the Europeans coming in, they was bringing them gifts. They were showing them new things. Once they got comfortable, they began to learn the European language. Now, you have to understand that some tribes did not allow this. Some tribes did not want to, learn the language. They took the presents, they allowed them to set up shop, and they allowed them to just, occupy some spaces. Like, okay, you're here, you need a place to stay, I'll allow you to build a hut on my land. I don't want you touching or interacting with my people. You stay there, we stay here. Now, a lot of the Europeans, they needed a way to communicate with the people. So they would ask the kings would they allow them to take some, Africans back to America or back to Europe and teach them English, teach them their ways. And the kings wouldn't allow it in a lot of cases. They said, no, I don't want you taking none of my people back there with you. But you can take these prisoners of war with you. You can teach them the language. And when y'all come back, they'll be our interpreter. So now what ended up happening is, you got to remember, these prisoners of war are not from that tribe. So what the Europeans did was they convinced these prisoners of war to basically turn on their captors. They taught them the language, they knew how to communicate with them, and they basically got the lay of the land from these prisoners of war. And they used this information to basically catch slaves. So now you had these African tribe members who are not from these tribes, who are prisoners of war, basically turning on their enemies. It wasn't Africans selling their brother, cousin, sister, or their next door neighbors into slavery. It was an enemy selling his enemy into slavery. And understand this. Everything that I'm saying right now happened on a small scale. We're talking about there was only a few instances where everything I just described, I'm talking about them coming over and setting up churches and all that. There's only a few instances where this actually happened. Most of the time, you just had a bunch of ships coming in there, just like we've been taught, jumping off of boats and snatching people and making them slaves. This is how it really went down. Only in a few cases what I just described took place. So, no. We were not selling our people into slavery. It didn't go down that way. So now, a lot of the kings, a lot of these rulers of these villages, what they did was they did sell their prisoners of war to the white man. They did sell their enemies into slavery, because had they not, you got to remember, these people had guns. The tribes didn't have guns. Had they not sold their enemies to these Europeans, they would have all been enslaved. So they did what they had to do. And in a lot of cases, it didn't matter who sold who. They all became prisoners of war. They all became slaves in a lot of cases. So again, no. Africans did not just go around selling their cousin, brother, neighbors into slavery. They sold their enemies. And in a lot of cases, they sold their enemies into slavery under duress, under protest. They had no choice. Now, we all know about a lot of the trade routes. I mean, when you look at how many trade routes was coming in and out of Africa, they had to do this on the coast, which is why I said that this happened in a few cases, because they could only go but so far into Africa to catch slaves. If they weren't in any deep, they was doomed. They wouldn't made it out of there alive. So it had to come to the coastline and go to these villages on the coast to get slaves. So it depends on who you was involved with or where you was coming from, which trade route you took. So now we all know about the Dutch. The Dutch had a heavy, huge involvement in the whole slave trade. We know about the Dutch East India Trading Company. It was one of the largest trading companies in the world at that time. So now understand, the Dutch East Indian Trading Company used a lot of slave labor. There was a huge corporation. They was considered the first multinational corporation in the world. They was huge. They was so huge that they had their own coins. Now, usually a monarchy or a country strikes their own coins, but this company had their own coins. They was the first company to actually sell stock in their company. They had a monopoly on the whole spice industry, the Dutch East Indian Trading Company, and of course, they had a lot of slaves. They had almost 3,000 ships. So of course they would need a lot of slaves to help them crew all of those ships. Now, a lot of people have heard of Johann van Riebeeck, who is basically considered the father or founder of Cape Town, South Africa, which is bull because there was already Africans in Cape Town, South Africa before he got there. There was already Africans in America before Columbus ever set foot on there. So they didn't discover anything. Now, Johann van Riebeeck went on to become the Governor General of the Dutch East Indies, and he later worked for the Dutch East Indian Trading Company. Today, his face is on coins, is on money. He has statues in Cape Town, South Africa. He has his own holiday. So these people are sitting there and they basically pass money around with the face and the image of a man who was responsible for the enslavement of thousands of African people. So now understand, once the Dutch came into South Africa, once they came into Cape Town and began to set up, their city, what they used to do was they used to accuse a lot of the Africans in these villages of stealing cattle, of stealing things from them, so they can get into confrontations and take a lot of them as slaves. These are some of the tactics that was used back then for them to get slaves. So understand, this whole thing with slavery did not begin because Africans sold Africans into slavery. This was a supply and demand business, plain and simple. Now, it wasn't that Africans was walking around saying, hey, I got Africans for sale. It was the simple fact that Africans had prisoners of war and that the Europeans and the Portuguese and the Dutch can use this to their advantage to try to maybe get them to sell these prisoners of war to them. So now, one of the people we can point to prove that this wasn't a simple matter of Africans enslaving Africans is Queen Nzinga. Now, Queen Nzinga of Angola, she was the queen of the Mbutu people in Angola. Now, she managed for over 30 years to keep the Portuguese and the Europeans and the Dutch from taking slaves from Angola, from taking slaves from the Mbutu people. Now, Queen Nzinga, she was a very smart woman. She was powerful. She managed to unite with a lot of tribes in Angola. She united with the Bengala and the Ndongo and the Mutamba tribes to help her fight off the Portuguese. Now, understand, the Portuguese was in competition with the Europeans and with the Dutch in this whole slave trade. They was in competition, so she was smart enough to unite with the Dutch. And a lot of people always bring this up and say, oh, well, the Africans sold slaves to the Dutch. And they kind of point to this whole union between, Queen Nzinga and the Dutch. No, she was smart enough to unite with them and come to an agreement that, if the Dutch can't have slaves, make sure that the Portuguese can't have slaves and nobody else can have slaves. So that was the agreement. It wasn't that she was selling slaves or what have you. She was actually taking in runaway slaves who ran away from the Dutch and from the Europeans. She would take them into her tribe. So she wasn't selling slaves, and they wasn't selling slaves to the Dutch. So let's kill that noise. Now, what happened was she would go to war with the Portuguese along with those other tribes and the Dutch, and they would fight off the Portuguese. Now, she actually has a statue still today in Angola. Now, we know that the Portuguese eventually defeated the Dutch down in South Africa, but, the whole revolution happened and Angola became free. I think it was 1975 when they got their independence down in Angola. So now this whole thing about us selling each other into slavery is bull. We can kill that noise right now by looking at actual history and looking at facts and seeing that this was not the case. The whole reason why, the main reason why African Americans, when we get into slavery, it's not so much about slavery. Yes, that was a horrible part. That was something that we will never forget about, and people will have to accept that. It's what took place after slavery that affects us as African Americans today more than anything else. Most of us understand as African Americans, we did not go through slavery. We did not have to go through it. Our ancestors did. But we can see and we can look at our situation today as a people and say that, hey, because of slavery, we are here. Now, a lot of white people will say, and a lot of people will point to, the slaves being free and point to, hey, well, you guys were free. And we have a lot of programs that can help you out to where you can get into a better situation. But let's be real. These situations are controlled by people who have hatred towards African Americans. It's just as simple as that. These were the things that was taking place after slavery. So when white people sit up there and they say, well, you enslaved yourselves, this and that. Well, you were set free. Well, when we were set free, we had the whole civil rights movement. We had the whole Jim Crow law. We had so many things put in our way. Just think about it. We done went through hundreds of years of slavery to get set free and still have to go through bigotry and racism and Jim Crow like it's some kind of sick game. So yes, part of the reason why a lot of African Americans are upset is because of what took place after slavery. We talk about from Black Wall Street all the way up to the civil rights movement, everything that happened in between with, Marcus Garvey and Dr. King and Malcolm X and so many of our leaders being assassinated, all the stuff we had to go through. And then today when we look at, cops, white cops killing black people, shooting them to death, and you can't look at all these things and then look me in the face and just say, it's your fault. You did this. Everything that happened after slavery, we're talking about teenagers being hung in the streets by white mobs. Emmett Till, what they did to him. Teens being burnt alive in the street. People being hanged, women being hanged. White people killing their own people because they wanted to help us. These are things that we look at and we can point to and we have every right to be upset with because we can look at them and we can look at our situation today and say, you know what, this was only 50 years ago. It's a lot of these racist people still here, and they are still in positions of power, and they are still holding us back. Yes, it is a lot different today. We can do a lot better today. And there are some things that we need to do ourselves as African Americans to make our situation better. But we will not forget the past. We will not forget why we are here. The whole purpose, the whole result of slavery is us. We would not be here if our ancestors was not enslaved. I'm talking about we wouldn't be here as far as our situation today, not our presence. We were already here in America, as I said. But when we look back at our past, we can see as a direct result of slavery, our situation. So when we get upset, we're not coming at the white people of today. Yeah, a lot of white people of today might get that backlash when they say stupid stuff like, it's your own fault. Or a lot of racist white people are going to always get that backlash when they say anything. But we're not coming at the white people of today because any sane African American can see that you guys had nothing to do with it. It's a lot of white people out there who have had our back, who has been protesting with us, who has been helping us out through this system for centuries, for a long time. So we can't just turn our back on every single white person and say that every single white person is bad. It's just a few. Now, I have been in debates with white people who have brought up this subject, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, so people can see the truth and understand. You need some education. You need to do some more research and find out what really took place with this whole slavery issue. It had nothing to do with Africans simply selling Africans into slavery. That does not justify the acts that took place within slavery. It doesn't justify it at all. Now, it's a lot of things I didn't get into in this video because this whole topic is just a ridiculous thing to talk about. It's ridiculous for somebody to bring up and just say that, hey, you know, you did it to yourselves. Slavery happened because you sold your own people into slavery and you should just deal with it. It's your own fault. It's a ridiculous thing. So I ain't want to make this video too long and get into the whole thing. I ain't want to get into Ghana and the whole Salaga slave market. I ain't want to get into the Songhai Empire in 1591, the war with the Europeans where they lost and went into slavery. I ain't need to get into all these things because we know about this. We know about these things. We know that there is no way that slavery happened because Africans sold Africans into slavery. So for people like, you know, Henry Gates Jr., whatever the hell his name is, this sellout to say something like we started slavery because we sold slaves, it's just crazy. And for the people who say, you know, slavery began because we sold ourselves into slavery, I had to do this video so we can shut these people up because it's ridiculous. These Hebrew Israelites, they should be ashamed of themselves coming out saying, you know, agreeing with this whole thing. You know, you Negroes sold yourselves into slavery. They say it all the time. Oh, the Hebrews were sold into slavery by other Africans. That's one of their claims to fame, these Hebrew Israelites. But I already went through that whole thing in my previous video. But it's a ridiculous thing to even say. To even just, you know, come out and just, you know, try to explain, because you can't explain it. There's absolutely no proof. There's no proof at all that slavery began because of this. So, had to do this video. I didn't want it to be long. I wanted to give you that brief history, that little bit of information, so the next time somebody brings this whole thing up, you know exactly what to reference, you know what books to point to. Now, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see you next video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I'm on Facebook as well. I'm going to put a link in the description. And thanks again.